Hi, everyone. Today's lesson is going to be about the social reform movement of the progressive era. As we've learned so far by hearing about other stories in which the problems of the Gilded Age were sought to be corrected by the reforms of the progressive era, we're going to be looking specifically today at women and at the rights of African Americans as people in the 19 teens, 1920s really started to push for equality among groups that oftentimes were not seen as equal. And that's how we're going to begin our study today. So the first thing we're going to look at is women's rights. And one of the first things that women really start to do in this country is to look at where some of the problems were and an identified area in which people said, all right, this is a super big problem in society was the consumption of alcohol and how men were becoming such huge alcoholics, how they were spending all their money, how they were losing their jobs because they were drunk all the time, how they were being abusive to their wives, to their children. And they said, we have to do something about it. So thus begins what's known as the temperance movement, which is a huge push by women to say we have to limit or stop the consumption of alcohol. If it's causing all these social ills in society, then guess what? If we remove it, then it's going to all go away and it's going to be perfect and everybody will be happy once again. That was the thought. We'll see in our next unit about the 1920s how different that actually turned out to be. But that's a preview for later. Temperance movement, so the idea of limiting the consumption of alcohol. As I said, because of the problems in society, they said that if we removed it, we'll have a better opportunity to have a little bit of happiness, a little bit more peace in the family. That led to the ratification of the 18th Amendment. And the 18th Amendment, which we'll talk about more in a second, was the banning of alcohol. It's known as the Prohibition Amendment, the idea that there will be no alcohol sold, made, consumed within the United States, period. Ratified by the majority of the states in order to make it an amendment. And the 18th Amendment goes on the books as being the banning of alcohol amendment, their prohibition amendment. So again, the idea of a temperance movement, limiting the consumption of alcohol, pushed by women. As a result, the 18th Amendment is passed, which banned alcohol and its manufacture across the entirety of the United States. Pretty interesting when you see 36 state ratifies it. I mean, you think about that many states say this is the perfect idea. This is what we need to do. This is how we're going to make our society better. It'd be hard to imagine an amendment today being agreed upon by 36 different states, but that's how it was in 1919. Also for women, because in 1919, women didn't even have the right to vote. And the idea of the word suffrage, and that's a word that you should remember always, means the right to vote. Women didn't have it. Women in World War One played a huge role in kind of helping the war effort in the United States, which we'll learn about a little bit later as well. And they said, how can we be helping our country? How can we try to make our country better in every way that we can? But yet we can't even vote at the ballot box. We can't even let our voice be heard as a way of saying, all right, we want these candidates that are going to fight for what we want them to fight for. How is that even possible? So one of the things that happens here in the post World War One era of the United States is that women's voices really start to be heard. They really start to become so loud that you could not ignore the fact that why is half the population not permitted to vote simply because of their gender? That doesn't make any sense at all. And Susan B. Anthony, who from the 1800s was this huge figure of pushing for women's equality, pushing for women's rights. In the 1870s, she led the Seneca Falls Convention, or excuse me, 1840s, led the Seneca Falls Convention, one of the first opportunities for women to actually go and try to earn the right to vote. Unfortunately, she never lived to see the amendment ratified that women got the right to vote, but her voice and her name is synonymous with women's rights. In fact, she's one of only two women in the United States today that have their face on US currency. The Susan B. Anthony dollar coin and the Sacagawea dollar coin are the two women that are kind of memorialized forever on US currency. But because of this, because of the right to vote that was kind of pushed from the 1800s on, because of the contributions in World War One, the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920. If you can see this, I'm not sure if it's blocked. It's ratified in 1920, and women now earn the right to vote. And when we go over the amendments here in a second, you'll have a little bit clearer. What is this? There we go. Now you can actually see it. A little bit clearer of an idea of women now have gained the equal right to participate in American politics. When you think about the election that's about to happen here in the United States and how large women will play a role in determining the outcome of it, it's pretty amazing that just 100 years ago this year, Just a couple months ago, we commemorated the anniversary of the 100th anniversary of women's earning the right to vote. How amazing it is that just going back that far, that women didn't have the right to vote. So 19th Amendment, suffrage, the right to vote. That's what you want to get from here. Again, this is me, Anthony, demanding equality. So here's what we're going to get. The 13th through 19th Amendment are known as the Progressive Amendments. We've already talked about 13, 14, and 15, and we use the acronym SEX. For 13, we had S, which meant slavery abolished. For 14, we had E, which means equal rights, equal citizenship for ex-slaves. And then 15, we had X, which means X marks a spot, which is how you would vote. And it gave voting rights to ex-slave men. Gave voting rights to people no matter your skin color. Men, however. The 16th through 19th Amendments, we add to the acronym by saying sex, I saw, which is kind of an easy way, I think, that every single year people are able to remember these. And the I saw amendments here for progressive are important because they help to change what the Populist Party wanted in the Gilded Age. They change what women want and the growing power of women's voices in America. So looking at the I amendment, this is when Congress can tax income tax, so that we can raise more money as a nation. They can put a tax upon the money that you make. And everybody that has a job that's listening to this, myself included, has to pay money in income tax. That's just the way it works for the United States. The 17th Amendment, the S, means we directly elect senators. We directly elect senators as opposed to them being picked among already elected officials. You and I have the chance to vote on a senator. There are always 2 senators per state. In 2 weeks, the current senator of Texas, John Cornyn, is going up against Democratic challenger MJ Hagar to earn the seat in the U.S. Senate. The 18th Amendment, which is what we said a second ago, is the alcohol banning amendment. This is the Prohibition Amendment where alcohol is banned. No more sale, no more manufacture. You can't drink it. It's completely illegal to participate in anything to do with alcohol. And the 19th Amendment, like we just talked about, women. The women's earn the right to vote. And women now having the chance to be active political figures in American democracy is a huge, huge step towards a greater equal society for all. So those amendments are very important. Make sure you have that down. Make sure you can get the acronym down. Every single year on the STAR test, they ask amendments that tie back to the 13th, 14th, or 15th with voting rights or equality. They always tie it back to income tax or alcohol or women or whatever. These are always, always asked every single year on the end of course test. So if you don't remember anything about the amendments, remember at least 13 through 19 because you'll come back and see it again later. Jane Addams was another prominent woman who really said, all right, well, if women are being marginalized in society, then we need to do something to help them. And she's what we will call a social pioneer for women's rights that really pushed for the equality of women, tried to help women with employment, help women become more educated. She is one of the most important reformers of that entire era, namely for what she does. And again, when I show you her creation of the Hull House. But Jane Addams, she did basically everything. Philosopher, author, huge proponent of women earning the right to vote and the women's suffrage movement. And her name you can add to the other people from this particular era that helped to bring about change. Upton Sinclair and Jacob Riis, and you have now Jane Addams as one of the people that you also want to make sure you remember from that era. And one of the things that she does is to create the Hull House, and this is going to be one of your non-negotiables. Founded in the late 1800s as a way of having an opportunity for women, for immigrants, for people who are sometimes marginalized in society to have a place to go to start learning how to survive in America, how to create a life in America. If you are just brand new here, coming from Europe, and you're here in the United States, then how do you earn or how do you learn skills? How are you supposed to learn the language? How are you supposed to get a job? What are you supposed to do here? And many of these people who pass through here, a lot of them are women, because if you come here and you were seeking a better life for yourself after leaving Poland or Germany or wherever, then you have the opportunity here to try to get a job. But if you don't know what to do, then you're going to be kind of lost. And that's why Jane Addams founded the Hull House, to make it a little bit easier for people in that particular area of their life to try to earn some help. So one of the things, again, that you tie to this, the assistance for women, the assistance for immigrants, And in a time when a lot of people were nativist or they were xenophobes or they really didn't want to help immigrants, she went out of her way to make sure that they were assisted. And that's a big reason why we remember the Hull House. And again, you see her here talking to a whole bunch of children that all were there that would kind of funnel in and out of the house to learn their various skills before they moved on to other places in the United States. And then the final section of kind of looking at social reformers were social reformers for African American rights. Different perspectives of how do you get rights for Black people in a situation where the white people seem to have all the rights? How can you start earning better equality in the United States for Blacks? And that's how these two men, Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, make huge and very different approaches to the same goal of equality for Blacks, the equality for whites. How are they going to do that? How is it going to work? So Booker T. Washington, you might have heard that name before. There's a lot of high schools named after him across the United States. He is a very distinctive and important person for several reasons. Number one, he founded Tuskegee, which is in Jackson, Mississippi, as a place for Black people to earn vocational skills, to learn how to contribute in society by doing jobs that are semi-professional, that are important to making the daily life of the United States actually happen. How do we train Black people in vocational jobs? Booker T. Washington's argument was we can't, as Black people, go and just say we want our rights today because no one's going to give it to us. What we need to do is prove to white America that if we are good at jobs and we are contributing to society, then equality will follow. Equality will follow once people see that we are great contributors to American society. His argument was, let's just wait on it because it's coming, but we have to prove that we know what we're doing first before we're going to actually get rights. And his idea of saying, okay, well, what are we going to do? Let's train Black people to take or to perform in vocational jobs that are going to be assisting the greater good of the United States. Once that happens, we're going to get our rights. Everything will be equal, everything will be fine. So his idea was wait. Look at how contrasting that is to the person who came after Booker T. Washington and became a huge critic of Booker T. Washington. His name was W.E.B. Du Bois. He said, I don't want to wait. We don't need to wait. The 14th Amendment said we have equal citizenship, we have equal rights in this country. Why don't we have them yet? We're in the late 1800s, we're in the early 1900s. Why aren't we getting our rights? He was completely against the idea of vocational training to say, all right, we want to show that we contribute to society and then we'll get our equal rights after. He said, absolutely not. That is not what we want to have happen. That is not what we want to wait on. We have earned these rights. We have these rights already. We demand that we get them now. And one of the things he does is to found the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which became a lobbying organization and an organization that fought for the rights of Black people to say, we want equality today. This organization, the NAACP, is still around 100 years later and is still one of the most important nationally recognized organizations that fights for equality. And that's an extremely important fact to understand that W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington differed greatly about the path towards equality. W.E.B. Du Bois came after Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington died in the 19 teens. W. Du Bois followed it and was a gigantic critic of the idea of waiting. So we don't have to wait. We don't want to wait. He earned a PhD from Harvard, the first Black man to graduate from Harvard. So this man was extremely well educated, very poignant in how he spoke, and earned a lot of notoriety because people liked the idea of saying, we want equality now. We don't need to wait more decades to say, I want freedom. We'll earn freedom later when they see that we're good at our jobs. No, that's what W.E.B. Du Bois completely stood against. And unfortunately, at the way kind of his life came to an end, is that by the early 1960s, he had become so, I guess, saddened or discouraged by the state of the United States that he actually left. He left and moved to Ghana in 1961. He moved to Africa, kind of becoming totally disillusioned that Black people would ever get equality in this country. He said, we're just simply not going to have the opportunity to do that. I've fought for decades, decades and decades to try to push for it, and it still hasn't happened. And he died in 1961 in Ghana, right before the civil rights movement with Martin Luther King, with Malcolm X, with these prominent leaders, right before it actually began in full fledged earnesty, I guess, to say we're going to fight for rights. He never saw the Civil Rights Act pass. He never saw the Voting Rights Act pass. But the foundation he helped to lay before he passed is what allowed the civil rights movement of the 1960s to really kind of get a jump off point and led to its success, namely because of the NAACP and the power that they gained nationally. So when we close this out today, as we kind of talk about the social reformers of the progressive era, and we look at the early leaders of women and how they are pushing for equality, whether it's alcohol that's banned in order to save families, or it's voting rights, or it's women like Jane Addams who helps to push for the opportunities for women, for immigrants, for the people who are marginalized, for the people who are overlooked in society. Or we go to W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, who are both looking for the opportunity to have equality for Black people. Why are the amendments there if they're not being followed? Why do we say we have equality when we don't have equality? How do we get it? How do we fight for it? And they obviously had two very differing ideas of how that was going to work. So that's the idea of progressivism. There's a lot of takeaways that we'll learn about in future units that come from the early 1900s and the 19 teens, the people who were involved, the ideas which were manifested in that time, and then later on, we'll see how they become even bigger ideas as we push forward into the 20th century. So that's it for today. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great day.